April the 11th, 1983. The Vancouver Sun is no more. In its place, a newspaper called The Sun. What is this Sun? How has it come to us? What do the people who work behind it think they are doing, and why? What community does it serve? What interests does it foster? And why do you read it each day? These questions and many more we shall try to answer in this Vancouver report, Behind the Sun. The first newspaper in Vancouver was the Advertiser, founded in 1886. 2 years later came The World, and in 1898, The Province. The first of the Suns was a latecomer, having seen the light of day in 1912. However, since it took over the Advertiser, the Vancouver Sun can lay claim to pioneer status. The building behind me is the Sun Tower. It was actually built for the long-dead World. However, for several decades, it was the home of the Vancouver Sun, and this is why we call it the Sun Tower. Stuart Keat was a publisher of the Vancouver Sun, and he and I reminisced about the good old days.
Well, I was born in Vancouver and grew up more or less with the Sun and the Province, and always felt that it was a very lively, juicy, hard-hitting paper, and it was the #2 paper, of course, in the old days for many years, until a devastating strike in 1946, which enabled the province to, or rather it caused the province to go down and the Sun to take over as the dominant paper in Vancouver. But my first recollections of the Sun are as a very lively, bouncy, aggressive, community-oriented newspaper.
Over the years, rising costs forced the Province and the Sun to share production facilities. And so in 1965, the Pacific Press building on Granville Street was open to house both newspapers. Stuart Keat recalls the move.
Well, that was effected by the advertising director of the paper, Johnny Toogood, who was an old military colonel of the Duke of Connaught's regiment. Yeah. And he planned it as Eisenhower planned D-Day, you know. Yes. We closed down one Saturday and opened up for business in the new location on Monday. And that's quite a feat when you consider that all the equipment had to go, as well as desks and staff.
Many who now work at the Sun in the building on Granville Street also remember what the old Vancouver Sun and the old tower meant to them.
I first entered the Sun Newsroom in the old Sun Tower when I was 6 years old. And that's when I fell in love with the Vancouver Sun.
What do you remember of that room?
I remember it very well. There were a lot of men, crusty men, sitting around the desk wearing green eye shades. I seem to remember they even had black armbands, and they were all yelling copy too. And nobody smiled, nobody looked up from their work, and they were working terribly hard at producing these long galleys of ink-smudged paper.
And I had come from a fairly small paper in Victoria, and all of a sudden I'm in this new city in this huge, strange-looking building down at the corner of Pender and Beatty, and working a night shift, which I had never done before. And it was all quite overwhelming. It looked different, it felt different, the place smelled different. But it was very, very exciting, because I thought to myself, well, the 5 or 6 years I put in Victoria really don't mean all that much. It starts right now, because I'm in the big leagues now.
From the Vancouver Sun to just the Sun. Why this break with history? Stuart Keat places the name change in its historical perspective.
I find that very amusing, because Mr. Cromie, the founder, had the Vancouver Sun. His son Don dropped Vancouver. I came along, I put it back in, and now that Clark Davies published, he's taking it out again. So this is, what, four changes have been in 50, 60 years.
For the present publisher of the Sun, Mr. Clark Davie, the change of name was inevitable.
It was an idea that was brought to us in a staff think tank discussion, and was widely supported at that time by members of the staff who represented all the departments within the Sun. We are not simply a Vancouver in the narrow sense of the word Vancouver newspaper.
Does it mean that you are abandoning Vancouver
Not in
as
any.
you object in order to go more into the suburbs?
Not in the narrow definition of the municipal boundaries. We are trying to tell the people in the suburbs that we care as much for them as we care for the people who live at Granville and 41st.
After the break, I'll be back to see how this paper is transformed from ideas in people's mind to half a pound of newsprint. This is the home of what is now simply called the Sun. Oh, it is not as romantic as the old Sun Tower, but it is a modern, efficient factory that churns out 250,000 suns each day. Come with me, ladies and gentlemen, and see the magic of the sun. The Vancouver Sun has 420 employees organized in two broad divisions: administration, which includes marketing, advertising, sales, circulation, and financial services, and the other division, which is called editorial and is centered in the newsroom. Mr. Bruce Lawson is the managing editor of the paper, and Mr. Frank Ritter, editor of its editorial pages. Under them come the news, graphic, features, city, business, and sports editors. They are assistants of many kinds, along with reporters, columnists, and support staff. Presiding over all is the awesome presence of the publisher, who in this case is Mr. Clark Davey. More than anyone else, he is responsible for whatever it is the Sun is.
We are believers first, I think, in free enterprise. We are believers in what I would describe as the small L liberal view of social issues, and on political issues tend to be more on the small C conservative side of issues.
250,000 newspapers are churned out by these presses 6 times a week. The Sun has 3 editions daily, Monday through Friday. The 3-star edition comes off the presses at about 8:30 a.m., the 4-star one at about 11:45, and it is that edition which is delivered to your home, and the final or 5-star edition after 1:30. On Saturday, there is only 1 edition. For your quarter, you get half a pound of newsprint, some 125,000 words, and reams of information. The frontline producers of the news you get every day in the Sun are the reporters and the columnists. I asked several reporters why they do what they do at the Sun.
We have to tell the readers what the movers and shakers out there are saying, and the readers can then make up their own minds.
I guess it's sort of an Agatha Christie complex, of liking to prod away at different subjects, and I guess having the authority of a newspaper to ask questions that a lot of other people can't ask, and it's just basic curiosity.
I think I'm naturally a snoop, and this gave me a chance to be a career snoop.
The judgments are considered. They're based on what I think people out there are interested in. In the end, I think what it comes down to is what I'm interested in, because those biases inevitably color those decisions, and my perception of your interest is filtered through my own eyes.
A reporter's life is an adventure in variety. Some moments are better than others, and some give rise to frustrations.
I think that labor relations, management, staff relations have deteriorated drastically in the past while.
Is there a malaise in here?
Oh yes, discernibly so.
About what?
I think it shows in, well, It's rather hard to pin down. Just morale is low.
There is a frustration on any newspaper or with any reporting where people will not tell you things. Yes. They're afraid to talk to you. And the next day they complain that this aspect wasn't in the story. I can't get it in unless the people who know it will tell me it. That's frustrating.
Danny Boyd and Nicole Parton are household names now in Vancouver. What is it that they do now that reporters do not?
Well, I'm allowed to express my own opinion. If I think something stinks, I say it's lousy, and I'm allowed to say that.
Takes liberties, I guess. States opinions. Isn't as answerable to the higher authority as a reporter is. My stuff goes through pretty much unchanged, and I'm permitted the luxury of stating opinions.
Why is that necessary in a newspaper, that there be columnists like you?
God, I hope that never becomes a popular question. Why is it? I think that people pick up a newspaper and read it for some sense of direction, a sense of entertainment, and perhaps an alternative voice to the editorial page.
What is news? News is what these people choose to report and to print. What they do not choose to report and to print is not news. Or is it that simple?
The criteria is basically that which is news, that which tells us something about our city. Now, that is not my criteria all the time. It could be, let's say, the medical reporter coming up and saying, hey, here's a good story. I think this is a good story because. At that point, my news judgment comes into it. Is it a good story? Why is it a good story? Does it affect a lot of people? Does it, is there a scandal involved? Is there a reason to write the story? Are we informing the public at large? For all the reasons that news is there, news is people. We are mirroring the community at large.
Over the years, the essential technological tools of the reporter were his notebook, his battered typewriter, and his pencil. This has all changed. Stuart Keith speaks of the most important technological change that took place when he was publisher of the Vancouver Sun in the 60s.
Going to computers.
To the VD?
Yes, VDTs.
Yes?
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, it was a technical advance as a result of communication studies throughout the world. I mean, Pacific Press, I think, was the first in Canada to go, but many papers in the United States and Britain and on the continent had gone to electronic setting.
There was much controversy about the utilization of these video display terminals. Part of the controversy remains. Recently, a Workers' Compensation Board inspector found 7 infractions to the industrial health and safety regulations. Reporter Casey White has some anxieties about VDTs.
Yes, I think there are many hazards that are not known, and if they are known, are not disclosed.
However, Maura Farrow, who objected to VDTs at the beginning, has reconciled herself, as has Danny Boyd.
I think we all pay much more attention to the copy we write. You know, I came up with typewriters. And you tended to be a little sloppy with typewriter. You handed in sloppy copy. Lord, I've edited copy that had more handwritten corrections than it had typewritten original copy in it. But now each individual reporter and columnist is responsible for putting clean copy into the paper. And if something appears in the paper screwed up, you can't say, well, it was a typographical error by those guys in the back shop. Because that area doesn't exist anymore.
It's you.
We are keyboarding directly into the paper.
So I was very apprehensive. I just didn't think it would work. I thought I'd need to have the paper spread out in front of me, physically there, and I was converted in about a week. They're absolutely marvelous.
We in the broadcasting media are heavily regulated by all sorts of government agencies, and consequently we very much invade the unregulated freedom of those who work in the print media. However, the question remains, should all these people, this business, this Sun, should they not be responsible to a public body, a press council, which would be the guardian of your right to adequate information?
Well, as one of a three-member committee that's trying to find the right chairman for the press council, I support the idea of the press council. I don't think the press council is the answer to all the problems that the newspaper industry sees within itself, or all the problems that the public sees with the newspaper industry.
What would you like the press council to do?
Difficult to say, Laurier. A press council ideally is a very effective watchdog on a newspaper group of newspapers. I don't know of a Canadian press council, and I'm not sure that I know of any press council that really is effective as I think it should be.
What's missing?
I don't think they're tough enough on us, by and large.
It used to be said of the Vancouver Sun that the only reason for its existence was to raise hell. Is this still the case?
My purpose is, my job here is to mix things up, to bring things out, and if hell needs to be raised, yeah, then I feel it's my job to raise hell.
Well, that's not my way. Yeah, there is a certain area of the paper that has to raise hell, that has to take an antagonistic approach. It's not a thing that I would choose to do all the time. I'll do it occasionally. But I think maybe I'm at the stage of life where I am seeing, I choose to see what I enjoy, rather than to see things that upset me constantly. I think that if you're a constant critic, carping and carping and carping, eventually you lose your bite, and I think you lose your credibility too.
Stuart Keat wrote in his memoirs that the Vancouver Sun was the working man's paper. In other words, it served a community which was identifiable and to which it catered. Today, what do we have? What community does the Sun serve? And does it? From behind the Sun, here are some views.
A great many of people who used to be perceived as blue-collar workers in British Columbia particularly are now members financially, even in these most difficult times, of what you would define financially as the middle class, people who are making salaries, wages, $30,000 a year and more. But no, I think we speak to a much broader spectrum of people than that.
We have gone through phases and fads. We've become, at times we've become like the Police Gazette. It's one pejorative term that's been applied to the newspaper. We've become very feature-oriented. We've gone from soft news to hard news and back again. It's a process of experimentation which reflects the feelings of the people in charge, and also sampling of public opinion.
Unfortunately, the working man doesn't have a hell of a lot of choice. Were you to bring in a third paper here, it might become the working man's newspaper. I think we could cater to slightly less elite tastes than we do.
It has become a Vancouver branch office of an Eastern firm. It's now part of a chain. Today, with the change of name, it will further lose its community identity when Vancouver is taken out of the name Vancouver Sun.
And is that bad?
I think the people, including myself, like to identify with a place, with a paper. You pointed out we feel rather proprietary about the paper. And the Sun, what is the Sun? It's the name of another chain, so far as I know. The Winnipeg Sun, the Edmonton Sun. May lead to greater confusion. It may lead to greater disinterest. And I think with this change of name and format, it's getting a new package. But in many ways, it's like putting a new coat of paint on a termite-infested house.
How the Sun serves its community may well be affected by the developments that took place in 1980. At that time, both the province and the Vancouver Sun came under the same owners, Southern Press. I discussed the effect of this move with the publisher of The Sun, Mr. Clark Davey.
They're prepared to permit the people, be it myself as publisher or the reporters to whom you've spoken or the editors, to produce a newspaper that meets their standards, not the standards for the Sun. I almost said the Vancouver Sun.
Yes,
the standards for the Sun are set here in my office and in the newsroom out there, and they're not set in the Southern boardroom. I have never had one hint or suggestion from the people who are responsible for the bottom line in Southern of what should be in the Sun or what should not be in the Sun. There is a freedom that is so total that it is almost frightening at times.
In 17 years from now, we shall enter a new century. And with the rapid development in the technological revolution in communications, particularly in the delivery of the audio-visual signal, like television, maybe all of this is already obsolete, and certainly will be by the year 2000.
I'm a print freak, of course, and I think newspapers are here to stay, as indeed I do television and radio. You know, when radio came in, the newspaper owners got very panicky. They all started buying radio licenses because they were afraid it was going to put them out of business. Then television was going to put radio out of business, and radio suffered, I think, in the early days of television. But what has evolved over the years has been that each one of them has prospered and has had its share. The pie has expanded, and each one is getting its slice. And the Vancouver Sun slice is I would say, adequate. So,
you're dreaming, Laurie. That's a dream that you electronic gremlins have, but again, that's a joke. I believe that the fragmentation that's taking place in the market,
yes,
particularly in your market, in television with 31 channels and by 17 years from now, probably 52, and probably by that time interactive television, where people will be able to sit in their homes and on their computers and call up what they want. That kind of thing represents, in one sense, a threat to newspapers. It's going to demand that we change faster than we have changed.
Well, this won't be here because I retire in 1994. Yeah, there'll always be some form of a newspaper, whether it's a totally consumer-oriented or entertainment-oriented. Lord knows what television is going to be like then. It frightens me to even think about the immediacy of getting fresh news and information on that tube, where people won't even want to walk to their front door to pick up the newspaper. But there will be some form of newspaper.
In the year 2000, 17 years away, all this will be obsolete.
Yes.
You sure that?
I believe so. I don't believe, I really do believe I belong to the last generation of print reporters.
Whether newspapers have a future or not will have to be decided at that time. For now, suffice it to quote Stuart Keith, "Is there any other business quite like the newspaper business, where the product may vary widely in size and content, but always sells for a fixed price? Where, having gone through a sophisticated laser system straight out of NASA, it is handed over to a 12-year-old boy with a frog in his pocket who throws it at the customer." So this is how the people who are behind the Sun see themselves, working for the community. How do you see them? What do you think of this 2 bits worth of information delivered on your doorsteps each night? After the break, a Vancouver forum, the Sun and its community, and also your phone calls.
A lot about the jobs we need, but you don't create jobs by cutting off gas, power, and water to our partners in trade. You don't get jobs by making false statements in the legislature about the banking industry. You don't create jobs by opposing coal development in BC Place. You don't show any faith in British Columbia by spending away our children's tomorrows. NDP government just doesn't work, and with the NDP, there's a good chance you won't be working either. When you think about that, there's only one choice. On May 5th, vote Social Credit.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As you have seen, we have been looking at the Sun, because today the Vancouver Sun became the Sun, and we've already explained why this was so. And we're going to take your phone calls because we would like to know what you think of the Sun and why you read it, And we have with us here Mr. Clark Davey, who is the publisher of The Sun. Good evening again. Good evening. And you can have a chance now to tell him whatever it is that you think about The Sun. And our phone number is 872-6631, 872-6631. And as well, we have invited in our studio representatives of various communities, the art community, the political community, and Mr. Swangard, whatever it is that you communize. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And Madame Lamarchand, good evening. Good evening. And Mr. Kennedy, good evening. And we're going to be discussing the splendor of the sun. But first, Clark Davey, how does the sun meet the needs of the community?
Basically by being a supermarket of information, Laurier, and opinion.
How does it cater to one segment of the community more than to another one? For instance, does it cater more to the business interests rather than to labor?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's pretty even-handed in its in representing a tremendous number of constituencies that make up the Vancouver Lower Mainland readership.
And by moving away from the Vancouver Sun to just the Sun, you are now serving a far greater community, but you're not abandoning us.
That's right.
Or are you abandoning us?
No, I'm not abandoning them. And we aren't abandoning Vancouver, however Vancouver is defined.
All right, we're going to discuss all these matters and receive your phone calls 872-6631 after this. Here's Maria.
To vote in the...
With you, Mr. Kennedy, how does the Sun meet the needs of the politician, particularly the civic politician?
Very badly indeed. As a matter of fact, I've come lately to think of the Vancouver Sun as the Vancouver Moon. You understand, the Sun is positive and the Moon is negative. It just reflects. And you are going through a phase of the Vancouver Sun that's so negative I could hardly believe it. Every night, any good thing that's happening in the city, from a political point of view I'm talking about, is knocked. Now, I've read your newspaper for 30 years, and I'm going to read it for another 30 years, and I wish you well. But I hope that this period through which we're going will pass away.
Mr. Davey.
Well, all newspapers tend to be critics of political parties, municipal councils, or what have you. I think the Sun has been very supportive of some things that you don't support, and I suspect that that's the basis of your comment.
But, Mr. Davey, every time I think of the portrait of Dorian Gray, I think of his sister, Marjorie Nichols. Every night she paints a portrait of her own mind in the newspaper, thinking it's Bill Bennett she's painting, but it's really her own mind.
Well, it used to be that Marjorie said the same things about the Barrett government when it was in power. So I think that all that Marjorie's demonstrating is that she gives the back of her hand to whatever administration happens to be in power in Victoria.
What is
she was tougher, excuse me, Barrett. Yes. She was tougher, I think, on Barrett, if your memory reaches back that far.
Well, I don't think that excuses it.
How do you think that the Sun deals with the coverage of the city council affairs and the columnists, Ms. Jose?
Well, I think the track record from the 8 years that I've been there has been reasonably good. But we're going through a terrible phase with Linda Hossey. Linda Hossey knocks everything we do from, if it's not her political stance. She even said that this city, like the cities of France, is maybe ready for communism. You know, you employ people that say that kind of thing week after week.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, would you suggest that she should be censored? Are you in favor of censorship of Linda's opinions?
No, I'm certainly not in favor of censorship. Right. But you have
we try to present a broad, spectrum of opinion, and I think the editorial page counterbalances a lot of things that Linda says about the
And you said something to me in an interview that...
you edited the interview rather interestingly.
Of course, I always edit the interviews.
And you have a token rightist, Les Bewley, thank God.
Who?
Les Bewley.
Oh, yes. Well, we won't talk about him.
Why not? Bewley gets more mail than any other person at the Sun. Why don't you talk about Bewley?
Well, it's unfortunate. I want to go to a phone call.
That's your point of view.
Yeah, of course, it's my point of view. I would like to go to a phone call. Line 1, please. Good evening.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question to Mr. Davey.
Please.
I like the format of the Sun, the new style on the front page and that. My question is in regard to the format of it, of shrinking it in size so it's more easier to read, like when you're on the bus or something like that. Instead of opening it wide open, you can, like, you got the Sun right now just turn it the other way.
Yeah, you'd be in favor of some tabloid format, I assume. All newspapers in North America are shrinking their widths And later this year, the web width, which is not the way you hold the paper, the way you hold the paper will shrink by about 1.5 inches. We're going down from what's called a 58-inch web to a 55-inch web about the end of the year.
It will be easier to fold in the
a little bit easier, Laurier. It's still not a broadsheet newspaper, which is what the Sun is not the easiest product in the world to read on rapid transit or I'm always astounded when I ride the buses, as I do every day, to find how few people read newspapers. It frightens me that there are so few people reading newspapers.
The publisher does not have a chauffeur-driven. Madame Le Marchand, you represent the art community.
I represent the Community Arts Council today.
Yes. How do you view the coverage given by the Sun to that community?
I'm afraid I don't have very much positive thing to say, because we seem to have very, very few pages dealing with the arts. And among those few pages, we seem to have a lot of articles dealing with the arts elsewhere, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in New York, in Ottawa, but very little in Vancouver. And yet you seem to have a lot of writers, but those people don't seem to have very much spaces in your newspaper.
So not enough coverage?
Not enough coverage, definitely.
It's not that there's not enough coverage, Laurier. The complaint of the Arts Council is that there's not enough coverage of what they define as local events, when they would have us ignore the fact that thousands of people go from here to Seattle, for instance, for rock concerts. They don't regard that as local, in spite of the fact that it affects a great many Vancouver families.
Excuse me, I'm not talking about events. I'm talking about informations about the arts.
The debate that I've been engaged in with your organization centers basically on that. The arts community is very wedded to reviews. It doesn't see coverage of what I call the business of arts or the politics of art, of the arts community, as being legitimate coverage.
You look skeptical.
I'm very skeptical indeed, because during the time when there was all this discussion about Appelbaum and Baer, there were very little was said in the newspaper. It is a very, very complex report. Culture is a very, very difficult thing to define, and people here need explanations.
Culture is almost impossible to define.
Yes, but let's try somewhere, you know. We have a lot of people who know how to talk about it.
We devote a very substantial proportion of the paper every day to what I would describe as cultural subjects.
All right, I'll go to another line, and we can come back to that. Hello, line 2, please. Hello?
Yes, hello. I'm a very kind of a frightened person. I've lived here since, well, I came out here in '46 from Saskatchewan, but the Vancouver Sun was always known as a liberal newspaper, but you seem to be swinging rather more and more to the left, and the Vancouver Province seemed to be doing the same thing with Alan Garr, who we know is an NDPer, and then your editorials are what frighten me. It's not Linda Hossey or Marjorie Nichols, who I think possibly is NDP, but she's very fair in her reports, but your editorials rather scare me, because if you live in a city when two newspapers are both left-wing, and we never had this before until you came out here, and because the Sun was always considered the right wing, the left wing, and the Province was the right wing, but now it's kind of like you're both moving one way.
Right.
Now,
would you like to change place with me? So
no, Laurier, I'm on your right, and so yes. I feel safe.
You feel safe, yes.
I should point out to the caller that as I mentioned in the earlier interview that Laurier did with me, that I think in political terms the Sun's editorial page is definitely small c conservative. We supported the election of Joe Clark over Pierre Trudeau. Sure, we're not the large L liberal newspaper that the Sun was traditionally under Stuart Keat, who is well known as being a supporter of the large L Liberal Party, and with Bruce Hutchison. Mm-hmm. Although it was Mr. Hutchison's influence and advice to Mr. Keat that persuaded the two of them to abandon Pierre Trudeau and support Mr. Stanfield at one point.
Mr. Svangard, you've been here a long time. You run the PNE.
He was at the Sun a long time.
And you were at the Sun a long time. And over the years, as you look at it, do you think it serves the community now as well as it used to?
I'd like to pick up something first before we can get, I'm an ex-managing editor, you know. And I like to pick up, number one, the Vancouver Sun. The Vancouver, of course, was dropped some years ago. And the Vancouver Sun originally also was carrying a number of parochial editions. And when I became managing editor and Mr. Comey was the publisher, we dropped that too, because we took the all-encompassing idea of all of British Columbia, even at that time, and particularly foreign affairs. If there's and the tabloid idea is only good for morning newspaper, because the Sun is a home delivery paper. You don't need a tabloid. You can't have a tabloid. The morning paper should be the tabloid. That's where it's read and transmitted.
So you're happy with the change of the name because it means that we've become a larger community?
Well, it's always been that way. I don't think it's been any change. The philosophy may have to change some. If there's anything I find distressing about the Sun personally is a lack of balance and a lack of what I call news discipline, where you can't distinguish between a news story and an opinion story anymore.
Sure.
I think some of what Swanee says is true in the sense that a lot of people, because they relate so strongly to one side or the other, believe that we lack balance and fairness. I don't think that's true. I think that we do our best to balance the scales in whatever direction.
What do you think is wrong with this?
We're moving, the news is moving away, the coverage of the news in daily newspapers is moving away from the area that Mr. Swangard knew so well, which is event coverage. We're moving into coverage of issues and trends, and inevitably when you move into that area, you're getting away from hard news, which is more factually based, into interpretation, background, and there's always a danger that you get over the border into opinion. That's something we have to guard against.
Tell me quickly what you think is wrong with the Sun.
I don't think we're as much in touch with the future as we should be in our coverage of leading people in terms of issues and material.
Do you read the Sun? What is your name?
Jason.
Jason. Do you read the Sun, Jason?
Sometimes when there's interesting front pages.
Yeah, but what do you read mostly in the Sun?
Comics.
The comic. What about you? What is your name?
Kelly Lynn.
And you read the comics too? Or do you read the editorials?
Well, I read Abby and all the other ones.
Oh, yeah?
Mostly.
And you like it?
I don't read the comics.
You don't read the comics?
Herman too. But that's
Herman?
it.
Who's Herman? Never mind, never mind. Well, thank you very much for coming. And this has been our special report on the Sun, which today changed its name from the Vancouver Sun to the Sun. And Mr. David, thank you for taking the time, and you, madam and gentlemen, to do so. And we shall return after this, so stay with us.